Able to be here tonight. Open your songbooks number 462. 462. We're in Matthew chapter 24, and I thought God will take care of you is a pretty good one in connection with a lot that Jesus says in Matthew 24. We'll sing all four verses of God will take care of you. Get Sam to lead us in prayer after that, and then we'll have our Bible class. Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. Beneath his wings of love abide, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. Through days of toil when heart doth fail, God will take care of you. When dangers fierce your path assail, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. All you may need, he will provide. God will take care of you. Nothing you ask will be denied. God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you. No matter what may be the test, God will take care of you. Lean weary one upon his breast, God will take care of you. God will take care of you through every day or all the way. He will take care of you. God will take care of you.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are thankful that we can come together this evening. We're thankful to have an opportunity that we can be together for the purpose of studying your word and to be edified and encouraged by our study this evening. Be with us through the remainder of this week. Help strengthen us and keep us safe. Help us to always seek to do to find opportunities to do your will, to help those who are lost and help those who are in need of your great salvation. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, Matthew chapter 24. Okay, there's been a whole lot of debate about Matthew 24, and I don't consider myself to be an expert like everyone else. I have opinions on what these things say, There's some things we can take from this that are rock solid, that are foundational and bedrock. There's a lot here that is so general, it is very difficult to pinpoint exactly what it's talking about or exactly when it might be fulfilled. There's a lot of prophecy, a lot of prediction here by Jesus. It is all true. The problem is not in how it is worded. The problem is in our ability to understand it, or the need for us to know certain answers. For instance, exactly what year is this and what year's that, and we may not need to know that. But there are some very valuable lessons we can get from these things. Oftentimes, as human beings, we fixate on exactly the historical event this may be referring to, and we miss the lesson, the principle that could actually help us. And so that's what I want you to think about as we go through this. There'll be questions that you'll ask within yourself, wonder about this, wonder about that, and the answer may not be here, at least in the way that we can be certain. There's some possibilities here, and so we'll talk about those kinds of things. This is an open class. I know we're all aware of that. I want to remind us that. So I'm up here, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be just possibilities, not matters of faith, but you know, it might be this, it might be that, and your might be will be just as helpful as my might be. So don't hesitate to chime in. So somebody read the first couple of verses.
Now it came to pass when Jesus had finished all these things, that he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified."
Matthew 24. Yeah. You would have to teach Matthew 26 if you're going to do Matthew 26. You would have to be the teacher of that.
I didn't take my contacts out this afternoon and swap to the glasses.
You got contacts and glasses on?
Not now, I don't.
Okay.
There is a transition that has to take place.
Okay. That's okay.
Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? For surely I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down."
Okay. Just a reminder, Herod's temple, this would have been Herod's temple, was built over Zerubbabel's temple. Zerubbabel's temple was much less beautiful than Solomon's temple in some ways. You remember when the foundation was laid for the temple, for Zerubbabel's temple, the older people cried. They looked at, I'm sure, the collection of material over here and the foundation, and they knew this was not going to be anywhere close to the grandeur of Solomon's temple, okay? Well, Herod's temple, almost everyone agrees, would have made Solomon's temple look, I don't know if backwater might be too strong a comparison, but it would have outpaced Solomon's temple in grandeur. It was one of the 7 wonders of the world. You put it up there with the Great Library at Alexandria, the Colossus at Rhodes. These great wonders, I think the Hanging Gardens in Babylon are one of the 7 wonders. This would have been one of the greatest things of ancient days. And it's sad that it was finished, I think, in 46, okay? And so about 26 years, it stood completed and in use before it was torn down by the Romans. We probably need to remind ourselves of the messianic fervor that was taking place at this time. We know how people responded to Jesus, and we say often what are some of the reasons, do you believe, that people responded so ardently and completely to Jesus' ministry? Why were they so excited about Jesus? What were some of the reasons?
Some of the miracles that he would.
Miracles, okay.
Well, you have several instances where people will say he speaks
Okay,
with one authority where no one else speaks like him.
okay. All right. Those are the two primary. You may think of fulfillment of prophecy. I'm not sure how closely a lot of the people were paying attention to that, but obviously the Bible writers lay that out so that we can be certain of that. Now be reminded that John, remember John the Baptist, was almost as universally regarded as Jesus. Okay? He didn't work any miracles, and he was kind of like a hermit. He wasn't someone, I'm not saying he wasn't eloquent, he may have been, but if you look at what he has to say in Matthew 3, he pretty well got to the point without a lot of words, you know. In any case, it seemed like a lot of what we read about what John said sounds like Jesus in Matthew 23. He just like, he comes on the scene and he's already saying some pretty tough stuff. The axe is laid to the root of the tree. This nation's about to fall. And he doesn't mince words. But he was universally regarded. So the point, the only thing I'm trying to bring up with that is it's a testament to the fact that there was an extreme messianic fervor at this time. There were other messiahs that came before. Gabriel talks about them in Acts chapter 5. And there's Josephus talks about several. And there would be others after Jesus ascended to heaven. There were others that call themselves the Messiah that came on the scene. This whipped the Jews up to the point that they rebelled against Rome. And they had the temple. And they said, just like the people did about the ark, when the Philistines got it, and the temple before Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians, we have the temple, we have the ark. God's not going to let that fall. And 26 years later, Rome took it. Rome tore down every stone. It's a remarkable thing that in history that happened to this great thing. And Jesus, when they showed him all these beautiful things, this is what he said. Not one stone will be left upon another. Sam?
Just when you were talking about John the Baptist, kind of what people were looking for at the time, how closely we're looking at prophecy, we do know that they came to John the Baptist and asked, "Are you the one we're
Yes.
waiting for? Are you the Elijah?" Referencing back to Malachi, and the work that would be done there. So they were looking. There was this anticipation, and some of them thought, well, maybe John the Baptist is the one. Now he of course denies that and say there's one coming after me, and he's preparing the way. But there was certainly this, and it was in the cultural zeitgeist, if you will, of the Jews that there is supposed to be this Messiah coming. They would have the text of Daniel, and they would know that certain events have happened and are unfolded. Any day now we should see him, and that's maybe why some of them, they see Jesus and say, okay, I accept it just based on that. And then you have the other ones who they accept Jesus because of the signs he performs. You have other ones who accept him because of the way he teaches. He doesn't teach like the Pharisees. He's not a hypocrite like the Pharisees. So everyone kind of comes at Jesus from a different way, but Jesus fulfills every single one of those needs. No one can say, well, he doesn't fulfill this checkbox or whatever. He does. It's just not everyone was quite focusing on the same things.
But you think about the fact that these Jews were, what caused the Jews to rebel against Rome was this messianic fervor that whipped the Jews up. And from what I've read, the Roman general, I can't remember his name, starts with a G, but in any case, when the resistance was subdued in the city and the Romans had control of Jerusalem, the Roman general told the troops, do not destroy the temple. They were planning to make it a place to worship Jupiter. And so that's what they were going to do with it. So then when some of the Jews heard about that, they whipped up another bit of resistance, and the Roman soldiers just went crazy. And then the general came back from his wherever he went to bed. He got up out of the bed, came. By that time, the temple was on fire. They tried to put the fire out, but it was too late, and the temple was burned. And then when the temple was burned, then the Roman soldiers, they were very angry and, resistant to the Jews. And then that's when they tore all the stones down so it could not be rebuilt, and without starting over. And so that's the fulfillment of what Jesus is talking about here. Happened in 70 A.D., just 26 years after it's completed. And of course, about 37, 38 years after Jesus is speaking here. So obviously this is going to catch the disciples. The radar comes up. Whoa, he said the temple's going to be destroyed. And they were, I'm sure, admiring, look at this beautiful temple. What do you think about this temple? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it great? A great place for the Israelites to worship God. Of course, Jesus had been saying throughout his ministry, talking about the fact that God desires, God desires a faithful service from the heart, not just the offering of sacrifices and the keeping of festivals and things like that. Yes.
Sorry, before we move on from that, we need to remember historically where the idea of the temple came from. God did not say, hey, I want you guys to build this temple. This was an idea that David came up with originally. And David said, well, why am I in this palace while God's in this tent? Referring to the tabernacle. God, of course, ordered the commission of the tabernacle and everything that went along with it. And you could say that the temple was the grander version of that in some way. But you look at books like Hebrews, and you go through a lot of the references that the Hebrew writer makes, and when he's talking about, the more perfect, he doesn't say temple, he says the more perfect tabernacle.
Tabernacle, yeah.
Which, kind of gives us the impression that God didn't really care so much about this temple. In fact, he tells Solomon, as soon as that temple is finished and dedicated, that this is not going to be something that protects you. This is just a place where you can fulfill the things that you would have done in the tabernacle. It's not, magical or powerful or anything in that way like some of the Jews tried to make it out to be. And I think Jesus is making the same point here when the apostles are saying, oh, look how great this temple is. Jesus is saying this is all going to be gone. Yeah. This is not really important.
Don't base your service to God on the existence of this temple. And you think about the idea of, Solomon's temple. I'm sure God was fine with the Jews wanting to build a temple. And he commissioned it, and they gathered all the donations from the people to build the temple and made all the arrangements, and that's all well and fine. But God was perfectly content with the tabernacle. And you can think about why that would be. Why would God be just as happy with the tabernacle rather than to have a temple of such grandeur such as Solomon built? Why would he be just as happy with the tabernacle?
The benefit of the tabernacle is you could take it anywhere.
Well, but
they took it all across.
yeah, but that's right. But at that time, it's not really going anywhere. It's.
I think it was always meant to be just a temporary abode. It was not heaven.
No, it was not heaven. And Solomon said when the temple was built, how could this temple contain you? The earth cannot contain you. And that's true. I think that God was content with the tabernacle because it isn't the grandeur of the tabernacle or of the place that you come to worship God that gives it its worth. It is the worth of the worship that is offered there by the people who come with a true heart, who desire to worship in spirit and in truth. And they love not just the gold of the altar, they love the altar. They don't love the gold of the altar that offers the sacrifice. They love the sacrifice and what that means, what they give to God. Any other thoughts? Okay, so let's look at verse 3, because the disciples have come to Jesus. Well, I'll read verse 3, and then we'll move on into the following verses of Jesus' answer. Now, as he sat at the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. Now, what do you think the disciples were thinking about what Jesus said about not one stone will be left upon another? What did they imagine would be the circumstances in the world when such a day came? This must be the end of the world, surely. I mean, to say something like this. And isn't it amazing that they could come to that conclusion just in a snap? That's the first thing that popped into their minds. It lets you know that people don't learn the lessons we think they learn. Not people in general. I mean, I'm not saying some of these, there would be a remnant among these people who would be aware of this. But the people in general, the lessons are, go back to the ark when it fell, the army was defeated and the ark went to the Philistines. That should be lesson enough right there. And then they get the temple in all its grandeur, and Babylon destroys it, destroys God's temple. That should have made such an indelible impression upon the psyche of the Jews that they would never forget that. But it seems to me, as I look at this situation, they had this idea that we've got this temple and it's never going to end until the world is to end. And they accepted the fact that it would not be forever. I think most of the Jews by this time understood the concept of heaven, the concept of hell. It's written about enough in the Old Testament, and certainly Jesus talks about it. And so they would acknowledge that, yeah, it's not going to stand forever and ever and ever, but surely this is the end of time because God's temple is not going to be destroyed. It's the same thing, it seems to me, that the Israelites of old said. And it's just kind of sad that people can't learn those valuable lessons and keep that in mind. And I think that's why Jesus said what he said, and Sam alluded to that a moment ago. Not one stone will be left upon another. So I think they believe they're asking one question here, okay? Let me see. The question actually is in three parts. When will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And I think if you divide this up into two questions, it says, when will these things be is one question, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age is another question, because they thought that was synonymous. So I believe Jesus, personally I believe Jesus in Matthew 24 is answering two questions. And his answer does not mesh perfectly with the disciples because the disciples' question was partly in ignorance. Okay? Jesus is going to talk about what's going to happen when the temple's going to be destroyed. He's also going to talk about what's going to happen when the end of the age comes, when the end of the world comes. Okay? And so I believe both those things are another. Some people who believe that everything in Matthew 24 is about the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, just in a nutshell, I'll mention, we'll look at verse 35. We're going to still go over each of these verses. But there's, verse 35 says, now go verse 34. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So I believe pretty much everything before verse 34 pertains to the generation to whom Jesus was talking just then. And then much of what takes place from verse 36 on pertains to the end of the world, as that would be yet in our future. So that's kind of my general take on Matthew 24. We'll get into the nuts and bolts, and I will say this much: Mark and Luke do not have all of this question in here. Their question pertains pretty much to the destruction of Jerusalem, and the answer given in Mark 13 and Luke chapter 12 have to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. And Matthew's account is a little bit different and seems to, have this third element that about the end of the age. Casey?
I was just going to comment that chapter is no exception, verse 36, where it says nobody knows, only the Father knows. So why would he say nobody knows the end of the world, or it's coming as a thief in the night, nobody knows, and then give specific details that would signify when that was happening? That wouldn't make any sense to me. So to me, it must be talking about things that were going to happen that were more contemporaneous with that generation.
Now, what he does in this chapter is he does not give, it's going to happen in such and such year, anything such as. He doesn't do that, but he does give signs for them to watch. Now, look at his illustration. I know I'm jumping around. Look at the parable of the fig tree in verse 32. We're going to get back to the earlier verses, but just to we're kind of stepping back and kind of giving an overview here. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. So what he's doing in this is not giving them specific predictive information, but he's giving them some things to look for. Look for the signs. We can judge the weather. We can judge a number of things, from the universe around us as we see seasons change and even some specific, it's amazing that the Farmer's Almanac can get it pretty right a lot of times, and they publish it once a year. And we watch the Weather Channel, a lot through the day and things like that. The point is, people know the signs and understand how El Nino, El Niña, and different things like that work. And so La Nina, I think is what it is, El Nino and La Nina. But anyway, they kind of understand about what the general pattern's going to be. And we can see the spirit of the times. We certainly have seen the spirit of our times and the change in our lifetime of events pertaining to the morality of our country. And Jesus is just saying there's some things that you should pay attention to. War in Ukraine, don't sweat the details, but there are other events in the world that we should kind of be aware of sometimes. It kind of helps you understand what we are facing coming forward. So that's an illustration that Jesus is giving them the details by which they can decipher the sign. And he'll talk about what they should do in this text too. Somebody read verses 4 through 14. Matthew 24, verses 4 through 14.
Jesus answered, "Watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginnings of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come."
Okay. There's a pretty good, from the standpoint of Jesus' followers, this is how it's going to go for them. And what is God waiting on before he brings about the end of the old system of worship and service to God? You just read it in the last verse you read. The gospel will be preached to all the world. So if you want to know what God's waiting on, that's what he's waiting on. And you don't see any other specific marker that from God's standpoint he's waiting for the other shoe to fall. This seems to be it to me. So he describes how this is going to go, and this seems to be a description for Jesus' followers. And I would imagine, even though a lot of the people failed to confess Jesus and to commit to him during his time on earth, because for the fear of the Jews, that they would be put out of the synagogue. This is John 12, verse 42. Even though that's true, when Jesus speaks to the people, he's going to speak to them as if they were followers, okay? Now, to the Jewish leaders, that's not the case. He did not speak to the Jewish leaders as if they were followers of him, because they were definitely not. But that's the way he converses with the people. He speaks of them in a way that people should go. I guess you'd say more positively. He did not speak to them as adversaries like he did the Jews. But this is worded in a way. See that take heed that no one deceives you. And I guess there's a few things that we could note in here. These are not the signs that the end is coming. First of all, many will come in my name saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. They're going to come. That's going to happen. That's not the time for the end. That's not the marker. It's going to happen during that time leading up to it, but don't think that's the end. Don't think that's going to be the sign that is fixing to happen, just because there'll be people who claim to be the Christ, okay? You will hear of wars, rumors of wars. Don't be troubled by that. That's not the end. These things happen all the time. That's not a marker and say this is about to be it. Of course, the world's always, I say always, pretty much always got some type of a heated conflict in it. We've got two pretty serious wars going on right now in the world. And this is a kind of a serious time for us. But these things are going to happen. See that you are not troubled. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. This is not the sign for you to flee Jerusalem. This is not the time for you to take off and leave, okay? Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. You will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. You know, I think of Paul. Of course, so much is written about Paul, it's easy to find in him a fulfillment of so many of the things Jesus said. Paul was hounded from town to town. You know, it's not enough that he went and he preached in this town, in Lystra, okay? And it's not he said, okay, they had about all of them they could stand, and so he leaves. He goes to Derbe, and they come from Lystra and go to Derbe. It's not enough that they've said good riddance to him and gotten rid of him. No, they're just trying to cause trouble. And then when Paul is finally arrested in Jerusalem before he's sent to Rome, it's some of the Jews in Asia Minor that happened to be in Jerusalem for the feast and say, hey, there's Paul. And they stirred it up, and they spread the word that Paul brought Gentiles into the temple. And that was not the case. He brought in some proselytes who were fulfilling a vow. And nevertheless, this is very much fulfilled in Paul's experiences. And the other disciples were experiencing these things too. We're just not given a lot of that specific information. Many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Now, I think he's not just talking about the society at large, but Christians are going to receive this. Family members, people that loved you before you became a Christian, are going to hate you after you become a Christian. And it's not just going to be because you won't go to the beer hall with them, or you won't go to the feast, the family feast for the Jews, and you won't go to, the Day of Atonement. And, I guess it bears mentioning the fact that as a Jew, they could practice the festivals that the Jews practiced as a Jew, not as a child of God under the law of Moses, but as a Jew. Paul, helped some others that were fulfilling a Nazirite vow, and there was nothing wrong with that. They were Jews. They could do that. The Jewish law was both religious and civil. You can think about that. Now, I suspect that Paul would not take part in the Day of Atonement. and go to the temple and take part in, because the atonement under Christ is his blood, not the blood of bulls and goats and lambs. But there are other festivities that they could probably take part in. In any case, just those that they would not take part in would cause maybe others to hate them and begin causing family members to hate one another. Many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. I don't doubt that this may be talking about among churches. Timothy talks in 2 Timothy 4 and also 1 Timothy 4 about people will have itching ears and will heap up teachers that will, teach false doctrines and things that they want to hear. Because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. We know from the writing of the church fathers that many Christians, when they began to be persecuted, this would have been during the years after the fulfillment of the temple. Well, really, after Jesus ascended, but it really started after the death of Stephen, really, when Paul was persecuting the church. And a lot of Christians, their faith grew cold. They betrayed the Lord. They did not stay true to the Lord. And there were churches that would not stay true as well. Because of lawlessness, it will abound. The love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end will be saved. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Open your Bibles to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1. Somebody read verse 23.
You continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard and has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant.
Okay. So every person under heaven, and this most scholars would say would have to do with the known world. Paul didn't know about the indigenous American lands and things like that. This would talk about the world they knew. Every person had heard the gospel. It sounds kind of crazy, but if you do the math, if every Christian brought one soul to Christ a year, inside about 7 or 8 years, everybody in America would be Christians. I'm not saying, I know that Jesus said few will follow the straight and narrow path. I'm not speaking to how many people will obey. I'm just talking about the math. In about 11 or 12 years, everybody in the world would be Christians. So it's really not hard to spread the word to a lot of people. Of course, when you start talking about not just the preachers who were supported by local congregations, but every single Christian preaching and teaching, living the gospel, you begin talking about exponential spreading of the word. And so it doesn't take a long time. So Colossians was probably written around 45 or 46. That's really about the time the temple was completed. And so then obviously it was another 26 years before the temple fell. But this is kind of the shoe that falls, and then the way is completely prepared for the destruction of the temple. Why is the gospel going out to all the world the event after which the Old Testament law can be put to bed, can be completed? What is it about? Why is God waiting for the gospel to go into all the world? It's an extremely simple question, but I'm not looking for a complicated answer. Yeah, that's it. I'm not looking for anything real complicated here. Just so everyone will have an opportunity now. Everybody's heard about Jesus. Everybody's got some type of, they've either decided to investigate and find out more, or they haven't. They've had an opportunity. I'm not saying that, they didn't get an opportunity after the temple fell, but at this time, what God is signaling to the world is that as was, the Hebrew writer says, that which is growing old is ready to vanish away. And so the law was changed. The method of worship is changed. All of the things that taught in the law of Moses are completed, finished. Not destroyed, but fulfilled. In the sense, just like I get my mower out and cut my grass, and when I finish cutting my grass, I fulfilled the use of the mower, I put it up. If I could have some magic chemical that I could put on my grass to keep it alive but not growing in stasis, and I would never need a mower again, I get rid of my mower, right? I don't need it anymore. Same thing's true about the old law. It was fulfilled, which meant it was, in Colossians 2 says it was nailed to the cross. Jesus said in Hebrews 10, I come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first that he might establish the second. So these things are very clear, and so it's purpose of which God establishes Jesus as the Christ, and everybody's heard about Jesus, and then he puts to bed the Old Testament law, the way of coming to God, and now all men can come to Christ. Okay. Any other comments on those verses? Okay. Let's look at, we got a minute or two. Let's look at verse 15, and we'll probably pick up about here next Wednesday. But so he makes this statement, when the gospel of the kingdom is preached to all the world, then the end will come. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads it, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay, this is the event that is a demarcation, a sign that God's intention is about to be fulfilled. What God intends to do about this temple is going to start. So, does anybody remember what the abomination of desolation was in Daniel? Sam cannot answer first. If nobody else wants to posit a possibility, then we'll let Sam tell us. Pardon?
The Roman government.
Now, the Roman government is going to be the abomination of desolation here in Matthew 24. But the one in Daniel had nothing to do with the Romans. That was before the Romans.
Well, I guess I was thinking about the prophecy of the different empires that were coming.
Yeah. Okay, Sam. We're about to run out of time, so let it rip.
So, the phrase, the abomination that causes desolation, appears 3 times in Daniel. And it's in slightly different contexts each time. I think that the one that Jesus is referencing here in Matthew is coming from Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, where it seems that Daniel is talking about the coming of the Messiah. There seems to be a lot of very interesting language that is referring to Christ and what he's going to be doing, and perhaps some timeline to that. Now, when you get to Daniel chapter 11 and chapter 12, each of those has this phrase used there. And as far as we understand, the history of Daniel chapter 11 seems to be talking about the reign of Antiochus IV,
Yes. Yeah.
also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, who came through during his era from the Seleucid Empire, came down and reconquered, if you will, what we would call the Holy Land, or area of Judea or Palestine, whatever we would call it, from the Ptolemaic Empire, and had extreme measures against the Jewish people, basically desecrating the temple.
How do they desecrate the temple?
They were desecrating the temple by, they would offer swine.
They offered swine on the altar, yeah.
They could not use the temple at that point for the sacrifices that
Sure.
God had asked for. So, and And then, of course, this phrase is also used in Daniel chapter 12. We can argue about
Yeah,
what that's
the one in 11 is really what we're looking for. I think that's what Jesus is referring to here, the abomination of desolation in the temple. And, you know, whatever else it might be, that's one phrase that a lot of scholars point to. Now, historically, we don't know of an abomination of desolation that took place in the temple in the Jews' day after Jesus made this prediction. There was a time when Caligula had plans for his image to be erected, put in the temple, and set up in the temple so that the people could worship him. The Jews asked the Roman general to request that be changed, and the Roman general, at the risk of his own life, was going to petition Caligula not to do that. But before he could get back to Rome, Caligula was assassinated, and the issue never came up again. There was nothing erected in there. A lot of scholars believe that the abomination of desolation to whom Jesus refers to here is the Roman army itself, and Jerusalem would be the holy place that's desecrated by it. So that would certainly make sense if it's not directly in the same sense that Antiochus desecrated the temple itself. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a phrase that a lot of people latch onto and go very wild places with. But every time you see it in the context of Scripture, what you see is an impossibility of worshiping in the temple as they were doing. So when we get to Matthew chapter 24 here, it could be that Jesus is saying you're no longer going to be able to perform the sacrifices at the temple like you couldn't do during Daniel chapter 11, the events that Daniel foretells there. And at least that is a consistent pattern you see with this phrase. Mm-hmm. So, and that perfectly fits in with, well, if it's destroyed, then
You can't worship there.
So, it's hard to know exactly what the apostles would have gleaned from what Jesus is saying, but of course we have the hindsight and a lot of history to look up, and we can say, well, this is the context in which this fits, is the temple is not going to be a place of worship to God anymore at this time.
Okay, well, we run out of time, so we'll stop there, and we'll take up at that spot next week and continue on. So we have learned that the temple is going to be destroyed, that it is during the lifetime of the people to whom Jesus was talking, that the gospel is going to go into all the world before that happens, that there's going to be a lot of unrest, a lot of things happening, world events, earthquakes, pestilences, famines, wars, rumors of wars. The Christians are going to be persecuted, and there's going to be a lot of conflict in the culture, people hating one another. There's no justice, and so many people's, their faith will grow cold. And all these things are going to happen, and then whenever you see that abomination of desolation, then get out of Jerusalem. That's the first thing. So what he's going to talk about, we'll look at next week, is all the things they're supposed to do. It's pretty simple. It's not really a whole bunch of things, but he clarifies, pretty much tells them what to do, and there's not any exceptions to that. And so we'll talk about that. Then he'll talk about the end of the world and some of the lessons that we can get from that, because that has yet to happen for us as well. All right. Did you ring the bell, Casey? Okay, would you please?